For years, open source software felt niche, like a world of hobbyists, passionate developers, building tools mostly for other developers, tinkerers, hobbyists. That really was what it felt like for a long time. But something is changing. The conversation around open source isn't just free software. Now it's becoming more about control, independence, and fundamentally a challenge to big tech. In this video, we are going to talk about this shift, why it's happening, what it means for you, and maybe a little bit about what you can do. Thanks for checking out this video by Switch to Linux. If you like this type of content, subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so. Leave us a like and a comment down below. So this article starts when I saw this interview here from the Nextcloud CEO, and he's talking in this article about how open source kind of moved from this nerdy audience over into the geopolitical stage, and then we're seeing a lot of countries in Europe starting to adopt a lot of these free and open source softwares. So it started with a world of just people tinkering around, just trying to make stuff work. And I remember that myself. I remember the challenges of trying to get the original Calibora Office, the code office installed. I had to have a separate AWS server. I had to spin up this thing in a Docker image, and Docker wasn't even all that stable then, at least not for me in that project. Things constantly had problems. I had to have my Nextcloud on one server. I had that on another server. I'd use a workaround system. And then eventually something updated and the linkage broke. And I said, you know what? I don't use it enough to bother working with it. So I end up killing the AWS server with the original code in it. And now Nextcloud is so mature, it's a single button deployment to have an entire privacy focused infrastructure that I can even train a monkey to keep this thing going if I wanted to. And the brand new versions of Calibora, that same program I looked at, which was so hideous before, is so absolutely incredibly amazing that it's just like, this is free software. And that's really the thing we wanted to talk about is he really goes into some of the discussions. I don't really want to cover a whole lot of what was in the article. This was just bringing it up as the spark of the idea, but they're talking a lot about EU sovereignty and all these things. We're going to discuss some of those principles of sovereignty and such throughout the video here. But that is kind of the place where we started. And I really wanted to bring you back to the early days of open source software. So the roots of it run quite deep. Of course, the Free Software Foundation with Richard Stallman gave a philosophical bedrock of people looking at software just starting to develop, starting to arrive on the scene, and you could compile a software and you could run it. And the question is, what else was going on behind the scenes? Now, back in those early days, it was kind of hard to do really anything malicious. Computers weren't much on the internet. The interconnectivity wasn't there. But still, some software package could do something that you may not want it to do. And that's what Richard Stallman did, is he provided a philosophical bedrock, an idea that software should be free to use, free to study, free to modify, and free to distribute. And that really is what we have. Now, projects like Linux came on the scene after that, and what we know as Linux now, this whole desktop operating system I'm recording this on, is technically GNU Linux. Linux itself is just the kernel, the infrastructure that allows the computer to talk to the hardware layer and then pass it up into a software layer. And then the GNU gets added on top of this as the user interface that allows us to manipulate with the computer without dropping it into terminals and code and things like that. But this was created on collaboration, transparency of what was going on, and the idea that technology should be used as a public good. Now, the problem is a lot of these people now, the Altmans and the Thiels, and I forget who the other weird guy with the curly out of crazy hair with Palantir. I forget his name, but these guys all think that they're doing these things for the good. But when you look at it objective, you're like, dude, these guys are kind of crazy. You know what I mean? And so the public good element is here. The question is, what is the public good? And the Free Software Foundation would believe that the public good is out there in a world where we have control over our system, yet these modern dystopian technopolists over here will sit there and say the better good is for us as the elite. We are the elite, and we are to collect and store and analyze all of the data and give this over to them. In fact, did you guys know that Thiel doesn't even want our current system of governance? He wants companies like, his to be in actual charge. He wants that. And that is utterly insane, especially that guy. Do you think the human race should endure? You're right, taking a long time. Did you guys see this clip? It's crazy. It's crazy.
You would prefer the human race to endure, right? You're hesitating.
Yeah, well,
yes?
I don't know. I would.
This is a long hesitation. This is a long hesitation.
There's so many questions implicit
Should
in this.
the human race survive?
Yes.
Okay.
But FOSS licenses in these early days came out to protect many of the projects, but the polish was not often found in the final project. These were geeks that just wanted functionality. They didn't want anything beautiful. And this is where FOSS software got a reputation for looking a little old, looking a little dated, and things like that. And some people to this day hold on to those notions that software just looks old and dated and things like that. And in reality, most of them don't. There's some that do. I mean, I still do all my accounting for all my businesses on GNU Cash because guess what? I care more that it works. But yeah, I do wish that application had a little bit more spit and shine here. Maybe I should just get in there like myself and work on some style sheets and make it better. I don't know. I could always contribute that back. I'd have to figure that out. But, there's always that. Of course, most of the early FOSS software mostly functioned. It did give that polish, giving that negative impression to many people. And this led to the early days of Linux and free software to grow very, very, very slowly. And that really is the bedrock. But then what started to happen is we have this rise of big tech, and with the big tech starts to become the erosion of control. So most people did not look to free software because ultimately they just wanted something that looked nice. It was convenient. And this is the foundation that allowed big tech to gain this stranglehold. The big tech notices the FOSS community. They see that things are going on, but stuff's not really jumping in there. And what they end up doing is they borrow all the technological backbone that these guys are doing. They simply provide a little bit of polish and slap a price tag on it, and then just basically profiting off of the work of others. This is actually true in the current controversy going on with Bamboo software right now, where ultimately now the licensors are stepping in saying, what are you doing? Effectively, what Bamboo did is they took FOSS software, made a few polish notices to it. They're not releasing the source code as they're supposed to, and they're charging a whole lot for it, and then they're trying to lock down their printers. And this is causing so much controversy right now that the licensing stuff says, yeah, we have found 3 specific violations that they are doing, and we are now actually going to be appointing people to watch them and make sure that they are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. But this is not unique to them. A lot of companies are doing very similar things. Now, over time, the open source ecosystem became increasingly intertwined with the ambitions of mass corporations. Companies like Google and Microsoft, initially contributors to open source projects, gradually started to control key development paths and prioritize proprietary solutions. And you know where we're coming from here. The embrace, extend, and extinguish. This is what was called out in the Department of Justice lawsuit against Microsoft for basically forcing Internet Explorer on everybody. And then coming in alongside projects, the EEE came in where they would come in alongside a project. They would extend some basic functionality, add a little bit of that polish, and then they would kill out the old one while allowing themselves to be the dominant leader in everything else. That's really what embrace, extend, extinguish is. And this is why people had a lot of concern about 5 or so years ago when Microsoft starts investing heavily into the Linux Foundation. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? They're like, well, we completely agree with this. I'm sorry, but you have destroyed too many other beautiful projects. I'm not completely sure I agree with you. So there's always that. Now, this isn't necessarily malicious in every instance. Maybe it is. Who knows? But it did lead to a gradual shift away from truly open standards and a concentration of power within the big tech. It got to the point where the search engines, the operating systems, even relatively basic software like word processors became go-to software to enrich big tech until they literally held the stranglehold over everything and everyone. And we're kind of seeing this. We'll talk a little bit here in a few minutes about the dark patterns still on Microsoft's website about some of this. But the reality is the whole world seems to think Microsoft Office is the gold standard, and it's not. The XML document formats are subpar to what the ODT document formats can do, and they are proprietary. We can do some reverse engineering. Companies like OnlyOffice does a pretty good job of keeping on top of what the changes are and embracing the most compatibility as possible. But the reality of it is that these companies are pushing these things out, and then they're subpar document standards, they're proprietary, and then since everybody was just kind of born and cut their teeth on Microsoft Office, everybody just seems to think Microsoft Office is the standard. If you go to the ODT format, it's still going to work with your OnlyOffice, it's going to work within your Nextcloud, it's going to work within your LibreOffice or any other document suite you have. It'll even work within Microsoft Office itself. But they want to lock people in by pushing this DocX format and then gaslighting the population into saying this is the standard. Our worldwide global standard is owned, controlled, and is closed source by a private company that simply seeks to make money. You don't know what this document is doing when it's sitting on your computer. This thing's dancing with the neurons in your RAM. I mean, who knows what it's doing? It's proprietary. That's kind of the point. But all of this is leading to a modern shift. So for years, the open source movement was an alternative, a reaction to the dominant trend to proprietary software. And so word comes out and people are using this, but people are like, I don't know. I kind of like that Richard Stallman philosophy of open source. I kind of want to know what it's doing. So OpenOffice launched a number of decades ago, and they created this basically really good alternative to Microsoft Office. Now, eventually they got out of development and it's a stagnant project, but fortunately it was forked with LibreOffice. And then this carried it on, and LibreOffice is good, fine, polished, and actually quite incredible. I gotta say, people are like, oh, LibreOffice sucks. I don't know if these people have actually used LibreOffice, at least not as people that know what they're doing in it. As far as you can adjust the UI, I personally like the older toolbar. I can customize it. I can put everything up there I want. I can take down the things that I don't want. But they also always have this means to switch to the new user interface. And coming out in August, the next update from the Document Foundation on LibreOffice is going to really streamline that, make it look a whole lot more like Microsoft Office, and even add some alternative color to it. It's actually, I've seen the preview images coming out on some of the press releases, and it looks good. It looks polished. So while it was an alternative a long time ago, that's no longer the case. But the shift we're now seeing isn't about decentralization. It's fundamental rejection of the control these companies have over us. The problem wasn't always about free software. It was about being locked in by the powerful companies. And this is where that vendor lock-in comes in. So the lock-in really became apparent with software as a service starts coming up. You pay the subscription fee to Microsoft Office, and all of a sudden, you are now reliant on their ecosystem, their updates, their features, their pricing. You're trapped within that walled garden, and it becomes hard to escape. The vendor lock-in model, driven by recurring revenue, incentivizes companies to make it difficult to leave, not to build the best possible products for users. And one of the cool things I talked about in a video not too long ago, we looked at how Microsoft, they said, hey, you buy this Office suite once and it's good for the computer. Well, the 2019 Office version of Mac is, they're rescinding that. They're going back and it's going to become non-functional. So if you go on over and see the article here on the end of support for Office 2019 for Mac. Now, this has to do with a certificate expiring, which Microsoft can very easily just update and push it out. It would be trivial, but they don't want to do that. Why? They want to either make another sale of the next version of Office, or they really want to push you to their subscription model. So you are tied into software as a service. You're not buying it one time. You're buying it over and over and over. Just look at this page here. Look at this. You land on this end of support. Buy or try 365 now. Look at that. You come down here. There's life cycle policy, which they lied about because they said this is a one-time and it'll always work on that computer as long as you keep it on that computer, and that's no longer the case. Recommended upgrade to Microsoft 365. Look at this. Try Microsoft Office 365 for free. Yeah, right there. See, the first one is buy or try. Okay, you're ready. Now down here, you're not quite sure, so now you can try it. See these dark patterns? But you notice these ones down here, these are actually links to the actual software that you can actually buy, that one-time software, which is now $179, which, by the way, if you keep this more than 2 years, Microsoft is now losing money because their other one is $100 a year, I believe. That's this one. Should be $100 a year. Oh, I'm sorry. It's $129 a year. So you basically, for 50 more bucks, you have this and it lasts as long as the computer lives, or until Microsoft kills the certificates again, whichever the one happens to be. But you notice over here, all these big, shiny, beautiful buttons to try Microsoft 365, their subscription. Or you can just go down here to this little link that's hard to see here, and you can just buy it one time. I mean, I'm surprised they made this thing blue. They should have just made this thing like one color off of this. What's this? It's probably like knowing Microsoft, the font color of this is probably 666. Should we look at that? Who knows? I mean, I doubt it is, but it's actually it doesn't look too far off from that. Let's see. Can I find the font color of it there? This is going to be absolutely funny if it is actually 666. No, they're using some weird things there. But you know, they could actually easily go over there and they could easily, you know, make that something close to the font color here, make it really hard, get rid of the underline. You actually know it's a link if you accidentally hover over. They're not doing that dark of patterns, but these are still dark patterns that the one-time purchase that loses them money is just a little link in the text, easy to bypass. But the big, shiny, beautiful button, the jolly candy-like button, that one there is the button. They really want you to do that because they're utilizing dark patterns to maintain their vendor lock-in control. So with all this going on, many developers, businesses, and governments realize they are paying a premium, like $129 per user per year. I think if you're doing like a business plan, it's a little bit cheaper per user per year. But they realize they're paying this giant premium when perfectly good software suite already exists if they simply provide a means to spin it up. I mean, I showed the clips earlier on here. The new version of Calibora, dude, if I just planted you in front of this and you had no idea one way or the other, you'd be just like, oh, it's just Office documents. Okay, you wouldn't even need to tell somebody something different. They wouldn't even know unless you told them how much different that is. But they're not paying as much of a premium. I mean, I'm paying a little bit more for that server probably than the annual fee for Microsoft Office, but it's entirely under my own infrastructure. Actually, if I did it entirely on my own infrastructure, like hosting it here, it'd be free. But I'm choosing to put it out on the cloud, and frankly, for me, that's what I want to do with it. But it gives me the ability to do contacts, calendars, Office documents, collaboration, all that kind of stuff. I use it for a lot of things. And a lot of companies, businesses, developers, governments realize they're paying licensing fees for all these. And if they just get rid of that, it puts a lot of money back in the budget and doesn't send it to some international company to them. If, the EU is really what we have in mind here. Of course, a U.S.-based company could switch to these things and not be dependent on them either. But they were beholden to the company's roadmaps, its priorities, the ability to raise prices. The companies began building services. I mean, look at that. I thought that was $100. Like the last time I saw Microsoft Office 365, it was $100. Now it's $129 because they just raise the prices on you every year. Every year. They don't want you to have that thing on there. But they began building the services around the proprietary software, create the complex, expensive integrations, and solidified their entire control over the entire internet system. How wonderful. Not to mention the fact that all of this internet-connected software collected troves and troves of data on people, and that data increased marketing, external monetization, and the commercialization of our entire life, and some people are getting sick of it. In our weekly news roundup recently, we talked about LastPass had a breach, not in their infrastructure, but in their third-party marketing firm Clue, which we did cover here. I didn't pull that article up here, but we did cover the LastPass. Let me just see if I can find it real quick. It should be kind of in my history here. Yeah. So we did cover this in detail on the weekly news roundup, but they say in their privacy policy, I'm not going to repeat all of this, but they say here in their privacy policy, we collect only what we need to process your information. But then if you scroll down a little bit more and you find that they are augmenting your entire profile with anything and everything they can find on the internet about you, from buying it from other data brokers to scraping your social media to finding public information about you. They're putting all this together in a giant profile on you, and then they're sending it up to their marketing firm Clue to make a bunch of money on your data. Well, the very top of their privacy policy says we only collect the minimum amount of data used to provide you with a service. Yeah, we just go out onto the internet and scrape everything else together and just throw that all in that profile. Hey, we only collect that stuff from you. It's from the third parties. We get absolutely everything else. And that's the data that leaked. And that's how you only gave LastPass your email and maybe your phone number or a username and a password. That's all you did. These guys are a good company. And then come to find out later on that you're going to get a privacy notice if you're using these guys saying, hey, a bunch of your data leaked. You're looking down at this list of data going, I didn't give you all this data. Yeah, they bought it from all the data brokers, the third-party companies, and things like that. And this is what people are getting sick of. I would like to go out and just buy a product from you without realizing it. In fact, I have a funny story here. I had to buy a fairly sizable item that even with my van, I could not get shipped. And I know I could go to the big box store down here and pay a little bit of money and get that thing up here. But do you think I'm going to give the address for this office to some big tech company? Oh no, I am never going to stop hearing anything from them. Even if I'm like, and you can sit down, you can specifically tell them, hey, I do not want to be on any list, nothing. And then you are never going to stop hearing from them. So what did I do? I ended up paying probably 2 or 3 times more for a similar item at a mom and pop store, which is probably better money spent, but they were able to deliver it without adding me to a bunch of marketing stuff. And if I ever want to see them again, I got to go back to the showroom, which guess what, guys? I found the first time. I think I could find again. You know what I mean? And that's the thing people are getting sick of. Where is this transactional world where I would just want to go and buy a product from you and use the product? I do not want to buy the product like your smart television. Look at your smart television. If you guys have a smart television, bash that thing with a hammer and find a dumb TV. Really. I mean, those new things, you get a new ones, they got cameras, they got microphones, they got sensors, they're perpetually on the internet, they're collecting all the data, they're gathering all this stuff, and they're selling it all around so they can monetize you. You are now the widget being sold to make them millions and billions of dollars by selling your data to some other firm that's going to now use, if you have a web OS based TV, look at your TV, does it say web OS? They are now doing science as a service using psychological profiles to target you with ads because they think it's more effective than targeting you demographically. I didn't sign up for that. I just wanted to watch Netflix. I mean, I personally would never watch Netflix, nor would I ever watch Netflix on a smart television. But I'm just speaking about the generalities of what we do. People are getting sick of, you can't go to the store anymore and just buy a product without being completely monetized for the rest of your existence. And that is a thing that people are getting sick of. And so with that, let's jump over to the last or another section here, and that is talk about the geopolitics. Now, the geopolitical scene is raising eyebrows across the EU. Now, I know every leftist paper is all blaming Donald Trump, but the reality of it is this stuff happened way before Donald Trump entered the scene. Now, this is an article here, and I had a really hard time finding anything that, and I've seen these articles in the past, but with the modern proliferation of AI, you get on, somebody publishes an article and then you have 1,000 versions of it. So you can't find anything on any search engine anymore. Every single thing is an article from the exact same week, and everything is just the AI vomiting out the exact same thing everybody else is saying. I had to dig like 10 pages deep just to find this. And I know I could probably go back and find something older, but this was just a long discussion on Europe's digital sovereignty from rulemaker to superpower in the ages of U.S.-China rivalry. And all the left is like, it's all because of Donald Trump. No, this stuff was set in motion well before Donald Trump. They mentioned DARPA in here, which was like 50s. And if you scroll way down, I just want to look at just these two paragraphs down here. Rapid growth of U.S. service companies like Amazon, Facebook, and Google, their phenomenal market capitalizations, and the lack of any similar European companies that were able to compete with them prompted the EU to think its policy. It had nothing to do with Orange Man bad. Okay, the opacity of U.S. service companies' algorithms, with which they regard as commercial secrets, had made it difficult for outsiders to judge whether the shape or merely reflect the world that uses user experience on the internet. So it wasn't the U.S., it wasn't Donald Trump. All these leftists like, these guys, you guys realize how crazy these people are right now? They are literally protesting for algae to make the reflecting pool ugly again. These people have lost their ever-living mind, and they're dressed as frogs while they're doing it. Let's go, algae, let's go! Let's go, algae, let's go! I can't take these people seriously. But all that being said, now, did things happen under the Trump administration that intensified it? Yes. Mostly the Cloud Act. The Cloud Act, of course, effectively is an act that said, and this wasn't like heavily pushed by Donald Trump. This was introduced by Republicans in Republican thing. But remember, as I've always said, Republicans are incompetent when it comes to technology. The Texas bill on age verification is infinitely more evil than the California bill on age attestation. Okay. Republicans are crazy stupid when it comes to technology. I agree with them on some other elements. I completely disagree with them on the fields of technology. But that being said, they pushed the Cloud Act. The Cloud Act effectively says the American government can access with a warrant, allegedly, any data inside of any service being used by a U.S. company. So since the entire world was dependent on Google and Microsoft and Amazon, the Cloudflare for all these things, these companies had to have a means to make the data available. And having the data servers in your own country, like China requires, well, that's just so China can gain access to the data too. That's not so the U.S. Can't. But the Cloud Act basically says that any data inside of a U.S.-based company has to be made available to the U.S. government with a warrant. And so that absolutely intensified the push for digital sovereignty, but it's not the only point. Okay. In other words, all these guys just saying, it's all about Donald Trump. No, it's not all about Donald Trump. This was well before Donald Trump. He might have intensified it. I will certainly grant you that. But under this environment, the governments wanted to maintain digital sovereignty, and many private individuals did not want to give up their data to the government just for buying Microsoft Office or LastPass, for that matter. So we'll kind of shift gears over here and talk about some of the concerns and the challenges to FOSS software. Okay, you're like, I've sold you on this. I've scared the bejeebers out of you. Now you need a new TV because there's a hammer sitting out of the back of it. Okay, what are the concerns and the challenges with switching to free and open source software? So the first is we have to acknowledge the challenges, obviously. It's not necessarily easy. Don't forget, I did not switch to Linux completely cold turkey. This channel is called Switch to Linux. And yeah, we cover a little bit more about privacy and these types of interfacing things a little bit more now. Maybe we need to get back into Linux comment. Leave me a comment down below. Do we need to get back into more Linux content? The reality is it's like, oh, another distro review. Ooh, whoop-de-doo. 15 packages upgraded to a new version, and Ubuntu now takes double the amount of RAM, and AI was crammed up. It's not exciting anymore, guys. But paying attention to what's going on in the world does have real results. But this channel is still called Switch to Linux. I haven't changed it to the Tom Show because switching to Linux for me was the very first thing that opened my eyes to see all the things in the world. And that's what you need to do. You need to start by opening your eyes. Open source projects can still face issues with development resources and community management. Some of them may take some effort to install. Like Nextcloud is super easy to install. You just got to do it on a cloud server like DigitalOcean or Linode. I have tutorials about how to do that. All right. But with all that being said, some of them do need self-hosted. Sometimes it's just installing things. Sometimes it's just figuring out how to work it. You know, people who are deeply proficient in Photoshop and switch to GIMP are, GIMP sucks. No, it doesn't. It's actually quite amazing. I am actually, well, I don't know if I'm proficient in Photoshop anymore. I used to be highly proficient, well-trained in Photoshop. I switched to GIMP, moving over to Linux. And at this point in time, I can do anything in GIMP I could do with Photoshop. It is a tremendous application. It's laid out a little bit differently. That really is the challenge. But you can do everything with it that you need to do. That's not particularly a problem. But you do need to take some time. But if you're a Photoshop expert, try and remember how good were you at Photoshop when you first booted it up. The good news is if you know Photoshop, you're going to be able to pick up on GIMP really fast. It's very structurally similar. It's just things are laid out a little bit different. You know the difference between an image and a layer. You know the difference between the canvas and vector and raster. You know all these types of things. So just look for them in the menus, until you figure it out. Or go into the menu where you can reset the hotkeys and reset all your GIMP hotkeys to be exactly the same thing in Photoshop. It's super easy to do, all right? But there are learning curves on these. Now, many people may think it is outside their technical skill. I'm going to challenge you on that. I don't think it's outside your technical skill. I think you think it's outside of your technical skill. But if you just spend the time it takes you to watch 1 or 2 episodes of some TV show because, there's a hammer in your TV at this point in time, you can pick this kind of stuff up. It's nice and easy to go, But the learning curve for some tools can be a little steeper. These are solvable problems, especially when you have software communities that are very dedicated. LibreOffice, very dedicated software community. You can go onto any search engine, ask a question, you'll get an answer from like the LibreOffice wikis or forums or over whatever they happen to be, and they're very good. Use distros that have big things. I always recommend Linux Mint for people switching to Linux. The support community for that is amazing. So absolutely worth it. So essentially it just takes a little bit of time and effort. Most people can switch to FOSS software most of the time. Even companies and governments can make a FOSS switch, and it even saves them money. So what's your final steps to fighting back? Your final steps, the switch in open source isn't just a trend. It's a fundamental reevaluation of our relationship with technology. It means having privacy. It means having control. It means knowing what is going on behind the scenes of that black box application that's staring at you saying, input more data, input more data. Johnny 5 is alive, right? It's all about reclaiming control of our software and I add our life. When you start gaining access, like taking control of one part of your life, it causes you to take control of the rest of your life. It is quite incredible. It's movement driven by individuals who've had enough of big tech, controlling, storing, and profiting off of their personal lives. So my ultimate final question for you, will you take a stand today and test out some free and open source software and push to the limits of your perceived skills to see if it's easier to manage the software than you initially thought? Let me know your thoughts about all that. Again, subscribe to the channel if you like this type of content. Tell me, should we do a little bit more Linux stuff? I'm not opposed to doing that. I find some of this stuff a little bit more interesting at times. But if you do find the video helpful, subscribe, let other people know about it, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.